Computer. Okay, and this is my first time actually recording this bit, so again, I have not followed your advice and practice everything before you do it the first time. So hopefully this works out. Um, I was listening. I did hear you. I just want you to know that. See if I put it into practice. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Um, the topic for today's discussion is project management 101 is what you've seen on the invite. But actually, this is a little bit more focused in that it's project management in the SCA. And this is not the same thing as how to autocrat an event or how to run a demo. We're not talking about a specific event. The tools, the techniques that we're going to be covering today actually cover really any area, either in the SCA or your professional life or even your personal life. These are tools and tricks that you can apply across the board. So that being said, I will go ahead and share my screen here and we'll get into introductions. Okay, and let's start the slideshow. All right, can everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
All right, good deal. So project management in the SCA. My name is Lady Stephanie von Mossman. I come from the Shire of Finnegoth in Ansteora, which is between Austin and San Antonio, or Bringelot and Bjornsburg. So perfect location to be able to not only play with my smaller group, but to enjoy everything that those two large baronies have to offer. I have 20 years of senior project management professional experience. The last 11 of those at the fifth largest company in the United States. So I work with projects that range from small to 5 to 12 people upwards to 120 people with budgets upwards of 20 million, I believe is the largest one that I've had to manage. So I have a little bit of experience here. I am a PMP, project management professional, certified. I have to get recertified every 3 years on that to maintain that. And I'm also a Lean Six Sigma green belt, which is just a step below a black belt, kind of like in karate. I'm just missing really one class. I need to get that done. I should put a project around getting that goal accomplished. But anyways, it's a lot of fun. Lean Six Sigma, I'm not going to go into today. A lot of the tools, the techniques, and approaches that we're going to use are from the PMP training. I've been a member of the SCA since 2005. Started in Adlersruhe up in Amarillo. And I am a holder of various offices. I think right now I'm holding 3 offices. I'm a leader of a Scribal Guild and have autocrated several events and have more on my belt on the way in 2021. So I love doing this. I love taking on these roles, and these tools make it easy for me, and hopefully we'll get through this and it'll be easy for you too. So what we're going to cover is just some common challenges that we run into. I'm going to love to hear the ones that you run into as well, but I put it in my top 5. Talk about those phases and tools, and we'll chat about keeping your project fun and stress-free. Happy projects are full of happy people, so that's what we want to do. This slide I put up here, it's not because I don't think that you don't know what a project is or what a project manager is, but it's really just to hopefully take the fear of the term of what is project management out of it, because honestly, if you all have even attended an event, you have experienced project management at some level. Getting your car packed is project management at some level. So congratulations, you all have this experience, and we're going to see how we can incorporate some new tools to make it a little bit easier. The first thing to remember whenever you're managing a project in the SCA is that we are all volunteers. It's extremely easy for me to manage projects in a professional environment where everyone is very invested in keeping their paycheck, their jobs, their careers, their bonuses, all of that fun stuff. It takes a different approach and technique when you're working with volunteers. We have to fuel the passions that brought people into the SCA in the first place. And a lot of times we do that for some folks by keeping it fun. We don't want to create a second job for them. And a lot of times there's so much work that's involved in creating these events that we do that sometimes we lose the fun part of it. So your job as a project manager is to inspire, motivate, support, and be compassionate, because those are the things that will be of value to your team. The top 5 common challenges I came up with is recruiting your team, finding the people to help. There is a science to this professionally, and I know that there are several classes around this already available in the SCA. I believe even recently there was a class held for this group covering that. So I'm not going to dive into depth on that too much, but we'll talk about it a little bit. Scope. There are limits that can impact your expectations. I'm sure we'd all love to, recreate an Italian villa and, put on massive events of grand scale, but we have to realistically limit things. So finding that scope balance is important. For the schedule, again, this is not your day job, nor is it your team's. So things take a little bit longer to accomplish. It happens in the evenings. It happens on your lunch break. It happens on the weekends. Give yourself the right amount of time in your schedule to get those accomplished. Engagement is also difficult. A lot of people get really excited when you talk about ideas up front, and keeping that motivation alive can be challenging. So you have to find what inspires them, and then retaining those members. By the time you get about a month before events, there's burnout happening. And so what can we do to strive to keep a hobby from turning into a second job? And before I go on to that, do you guys have any others that you find is a really difficult challenge when it comes to managing a project in the SCA? Does anyone have experience?
Go ahead, dear.
I was going to say getting your large team to communicate efficiently is one of the biggest ones I've run into, especially if they're not all in the same area and can't meet in person.
Absolutely.
I would definitely say the single largest challenge I've had, and I'm drawing from 2 examples. One is SCA as a lead herald, and 2 as a director of operations for an anime convention, is calibrating expectations across the team. What I expect, and specifically what I expect someone else to be able to do, both their abilities and their limitations, that's very difficult to calibrate so that someone at the ground level has the right understanding of both what they're expected to do and what they can get away with.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone else? All right.
Wait.
Hi, Harold. Harold, what's your experience in the SCA with probably the biggest problem with managing a project with a team?
External expectations has been more of an issue for me. People who have always done things in a method that was different than how I was doing it expected me to be more like their style, and that is not necessarily how I would do things. The best example I have is I bumped heads with the local B&B in the past when I was an autocrat, and they were expecting things to work the way they had traditionally worked, and I was using the fact that it was not my first rodeo. It was not even my 10th rodeo. It was probably not even my 15th rodeo at that point. And, I had expectations that when I delegate something to an SME, then I only need to check in with that SME periodically. And otherwise they are, they're given the responsibility and the authority to make those decisions. It's a management style that's worked for me in the past, and it just was not the same as what was being used here when I moved into the kingdom.
Right. And I think that's a great segue to what we're going to go into, because we're going to be talking about the tools that are available. You are the PM for the project. And when you are such, you are the one that is allowed to choose which tools you use. You customize it to the style that meets your needs. And one way of doing things is not necessarily the same way that everyone around you is going to do it. But you are ultimately, the responsibility is the same. You are ultimately responsible to make sure that all the deliverables are done, whether it's scheduling a demo, scheduling an event, just planning a populist meeting or a social meetup. If you have the responsibility to make sure it gets done, you do what you need to do and use what you need to do, and use any style or approach that works for you to get it done. So it's your choice, and we're going to talk about that. So typically in projects that have a deliverable to give, this is not a change management project. This is a project providing something tangible, whether it is an event, a service, or a thing. Initiating, planning, execution, monitor and control, and closing. We're going to go into those a little bit more in depth in the next slide. So the initiation phase typically happens above the project. This is before you get the team all together. Typically, perhaps at a populist meeting or in your own personal life, that somebody's making the decision, hey, I have an idea. I want to do a project, and I'm going to identify a leader, typically yourself, and I'm going to talk with the right people. Your stakeholders in this case may be the seneschal, or a leader of a guild, or whoever it is, to get that buy-in at the executive higher level, to get your approvals to move forward. And in order to do that, you're going to need to identify very, very, very high level your goals and your project description and any sort of constraints or exclusions that you might have. For example, you may say, I want to do just strictly an archery tournament. And we don't have a rapier marshal, and so rapier is not going to be on the schedule. Just identify some of those exclusions. And the tools that we use for that are typically a project charter or a scope statement. Now, don't let those terms freak you out. I'm not talking about a lot of work here. Really, it's just as simple as a few sentences, a paragraph or two. And then initial budget allocation. So sometimes we don't know what the budget is right up front, but we do have a general idea. I think in most cases where we can say shirt size, what are we looking at? So here's a little bit of example of a project charter. It is strictly this simple. These 6 things are oftentimes, with some of the biggest projects that I work on, are what I start with. I always keep the date of when the charter is, because sometimes this charter changes, and I like to know what version I'm looking at. The project name, the initial budget, and if you're talking about an annual event that you happen to hold, sometimes you can use what you used last year as that initial budget. Estimated start and finish date, project goal statement, this is kind of like your measures of success. It's hard to dive into a project with deliverables if you haven't identified somewhere what it is you're trying to achieve, the ultimate goal. A brief project summary, just high level, again, 4 or 5 sentences of what it is you're trying to do and known exclusions. This is a great tool then to print out, bring to your populist meetings, talk with others. You'll use it, believe it or not, quite a bit going forward once this is written out. It's a great starting point.
Hey, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Just a bit of a humorous side note. That charter you just had up?
Yeah.
If you change the order a little bit, that is the same formula for all of the tobacco charters that England handed out during the 1600s. That if you look at the phrasing, that is how they phrase it. On this date, we do hereby announce this person to grant them this power with this sum of money to do this by this day. It's exact same formula.
That's too funny. Project management is so period. Definite reenactment here. So this joke we pass around between us sometimes. A lot of times when leaders come to you with an idea for a project, they want to know right up front how long it's going to take and how much money it's going to cost. And the hardest thing about projects is that we don't really know all of the details yet to be able to come up with those specifics. So I share that. It's just kind of funny. We do know a little bit though to give a ballpark estimate. So I had mentioned earlier here previous year's spend, perhaps the time that you have can also indicate whether or not something may have cost impacts. Let's say you have a whole year and a half to plan something. You might be able to order materials or supplies or whatever from other places that are cheaper, thereby reducing costs. Or sometimes you might have to get something very last minute and therefore the prices would be higher. Impacting factors of the current year, the coronavirus is a great example of that. Yeah, that has a whole host of factors that impact what costs are, you know, buying additional hand washing stations, having all sorts of different barriers set up to try to maintain social distancing of certain areas. Yeah, so all of that can impact the cost. Your current balance of funds in your account with your group can also drive whether or not you have X number of dollars to spend. And then of course anticipated help and attendance. We try to do our best to determine how much it costs per head for food. You know, what would we need to break even? So while you don't want to dive into the specifics of all of that, there is some communication you can have with your seneschal, your exchequer, to come up with some ideas on that.
Normally, I'm working up that budget as part of the event proposal, if it's an event type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to have that right up front. I may not have the exact details of exactly what we're going to spend. We may end up coming in under budget, but my proposal has to cover most contingencies and most oddities.
And in some cases, you're able to do that. But there should be flexibility allowed for changes to happen once the scope is really fleshed out.
You mentioned group budget playing a factor. When we were looking for sponsors for the Herald's retreat, we decided we were going to do it just before Wiesenfeuer Baronial. And Wiesenfeuer said they were interested, but they wouldn't commit to it until after Baronial and after they had documented they turned a profit, because the 2 years before the event had been rained out and canceled respectively. So they'd had 2 years of no income.
Yeah.
And now, fortunately, they made a pretty penny, and my budget was minuscule compared to what they were working with, so there was no danger to them. But you're absolutely right. I was rooting for Wiesenfeuer for a bunch of reasons that weekend.
Yeah, great example. We're going to spend a bit more time on the planning phase, which is the next one, because this is really where the project manager is going to be working the hardest, in my opinion, because it is your responsibility to gain all sorts of things: the project team, the scope, the plan, the schedule, to further define what that budget allocation is for each area. Identify how the team will communicate. I think you had mentioned earlier, communication plans were sometimes a challenge. A change control plan, right? We all are aware of the scope that never ends in some of these projects when left unmanaged, and things just get piled on, and they create a lot of frustration among the team. That's something we want to avoid. And then plan for other risk mitigation, avoidance, acceptance. For example, the rain. What happens if it rains? So some of the tools, the tools that we use here, team recruiting materials might be flyers, notices, brainstorming exercise, project scope, work breakdown structure, project plan, milestone schedule, a RACI. We'll be talking about that a bit more. Communication plan, budget allocation, risk management plan, and emergency backup. I'm going through this very quickly because we are going to dive into each one of these a little bit further. So again, I know you guys have had some recruiting classes recently, but some of the folks watching this might not have attended those. So we'll just touch on them quickly. Sources, looking at your local groups, your neighboring groups, and even asking the team members who you have recruited to ask their friends or their contacts. Expanding that out will help you reach out further for people who might want to be engaged. Outreach at your populace meetings, Facebook group posts, private outreach. A lot of people, even though you put out an event notice that you're looking for help on something, they don't take the initiative. It might be shyness or whatever. It's definitely not laziness in all cases, but they are waiting for that personal contact to feel safe to talk about it and consider it. It really helps for the people that are quiet if you're able to reach out and touch base with them and see if this is something that interests them, and also talk to them about what might make them comfortable as far as level of involvement. And of course, we want to entice our folks. We can't do it with money, right? There's no bonuses. There's no big pink car if you hit something right. So we want to find other ways to have team exclusives. Maybe it's a fun t-shirt, a mug, a pizza trip, a bottle of mead, specially made for them. Something that makes them feel special as being part of the team. And that could just be something as a private Zoom meeting. It doesn't even have to cost money. People like to be part of a group, and so we try to make the most of that. And make time for fun. I like to start my meetings with a social section beforehand. I want to make the best use of people's time, absolutely. But we do allow for 30 minutes of gathering and offering food and sharing things like that. Now, we can't do that now. While we're on Zoom, we can just visit, but that's often quite enough. Just seeing the faces of our friends and visiting casually to start off is fun. Positive messages. Don't dog your project. Don't talk down about the fact that you have all this work, you have these deadlines. Attitude reflects leadership. And if you want a positive team, it really needs to be your effort as a PM to send out the right message that you're excited about this and you're very optimistic about reaching your goals. For ease, pre-plan the role if you can. Jot down a few lines of what your different roles will be and perhaps what that might cover. Sometimes people don't volunteer for something. For example, site coordinator. Well, that could mean lots of things to lots of people. What exactly does that mean to this project? Bullet those things out and hand it to them. Say, is this something that interests you? Express flexibility. Perhaps a part of it is great for them, but part of it is not. We don't want to lose the opportunity to keep them for that role. Perhaps you split it into 2 roles. And create opportunity options. Lots of our folks are spread out across the lands. And so having virtual meetings like this, or creating team meetings where there's just a focus group of individuals that are covering something, to not require everyone to come every single month. Things like that, little options give people the flexibility and opportunity to stay involved. Any questions or comments on that?
Can I throw a historical comment for you?
Sure.
You mentioned recruitment and encouragement. Between my work as a voice herald, which you never have enough heralds, I'll just say that, and one of my interests is military history. Something that some of the top generals have in common, that includes Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, and even if you go into World War II, both the German and the Allied, the best generals were well regarded because they showered praise on the common man. Mm-hmm. As much as we deride Patton for how he treated some people, and he was an ass at times, he was known to praise the buck private who stood his ground and fought until he ran out of ammo and had to retreat afterward. He would make this man out to be the second coming of Christ, and he honestly believed it, and he made that kid believe it, which is why his men would die for him.
Perfect point.
It was that level of encouragement that kept his army going.
Mm-hmm. A kind word, someone believing in you, that could be far more valuable than a paycheck. Yeah. So, team formation, phases of team development. Some of you may have seen or heard of this before if you're in project management or if you've been part of a project team, but I don't know if you've noticed it, there's typically a really high level of excitement when a project gets started. People are like, yeah, let's do this. All right, we're getting going. We're tossing out ideas. Ideas are really easy, aren't they? They're lots of fun to think through and talk about. But then all of a sudden there's a little bit of a dip. In project management, this happens all the time. I recognize it regularly in all of my projects. There's a forming phase where we're eager, ready to go. There is a storming phase. And it's where the team has gotten over the excitement of the initial kickoff, and then there's still a bit of resistance to being part of the team. They are still functioning as an individual. It's not that they're consciously resisting. It's just kind of a natural form of, okay, now we're getting to work and the excitement's over, and this is how I do things. And so there's a little bit of pushback and storming. Take these moments with a grain of salt early in a project. Expect the dip to happen. That way you just don't take it personally. You remain supportive, continue to try to create a positive environment, but weather through that, because the norming phase typically happens shortly thereafter. People become familiar with the project goals, with each other, with the flow of things, and that relief and anxiety about doing something new with new people starts to calm down, and then you really start to see members engage and get very productive. And then leading, of course, into the performing phase. They're well engaged with the whole project. They function well as a team. They've worked through all the kinks, and they're getting into the home stretch of their goals. Has anyone else experienced this sort of phase in their projects? Yeah. I see it quite often. So let's talk about the team brainstorming exercise. So we had that charter, right? You had that statement. Bring that statement to your first meeting and let it spark ideas. You've got it high level. They kind of got a general sense, and then you have your team pulled together. Let them take ownership in helping to formulate this project. A lot of times I see people who lead something in not just this group, and in other groups and in business, and they want to plan absolutely everything up front and then get the team engaged. They work so hard. By the time they get the team engaged, they're really happy. They have a plan in front of them, but they don't feel like they're part owners of it. And it is much harder to get people to really stay enthusiastically bought into seeing your goals come to fruition. Having this brainstorming exercise is critical, I think, to keeping a team strong and engaged throughout the duration of the project. And 2 approaches to brainstorming. I won't go into these in depth, but typically there's the all together in one large group, and this can be absolutely wonderful for in-person events. It can also be wonderful if everyone doesn't talk over each other, for the people who are online to be able to listen in if you're doing something virtually. The cons is when you have so many chefs in the kitchen, it can take a while longer to get all that feedback in and get through the list. For the smaller group sessions, you can actually cover more areas faster by having little teams go off, build their lists together, and then bring their results all back together when they're ready for the team feedback. It's ideal when you have a larger space to do it, different rooms where people can't hear each other really. They can stay focused and plow through it. However, the virtual option of having somebody who's calling in online becomes almost impossible for this because you have so much background noise, so much movement. It's hard to keep them engaged in something like that. Okay. So you have 3 jobs in a brainstorming session as a PM. You start off the meeting by setting the ground rules with the people who are there. Keep it high level, respect each other. There's no bad ideas, right? You've heard that every time. Accept everything that is put out there, and then you stop talking. You listen and you take notes. The brainstorming session is not your platform to be a leader as far as sharing your ideas. This is the place for your teams to come together and become a part of the fabric of what makes up your goals and deliverables. You can ask leading questions. So if they get stuck or they start to go off too far in one direction, you can help bring them back. But this is your time to listen. If there is an item that they do get too far into, sometimes you will need to be the leader in that. You have to step up, ask people, let's put this on a parking lot list to come back to and talk about later. The brainstorming session is not where you solve things. It's just where you share high-level ideas. Any questions on that or comments? So determining scope, it definitely requires these 4 things to ultimately come into it. Do you have the buy-in? That buy-in is absolutely critical. You can plan till the cows come home. If your team does not buy into what you have planned, it's not going to happen. Budget, of course, we need to pay for the things that we plan. People, if you don't have enough volunteers or the right people doing something, it doesn't matter how wonderful your scope is or how great your idea is, it's not going to come to fruition without that manpower. And of course, time. Whatever it takes to do X, You need to make sure that you have the right commitment for time, either commitment from people or the time it would take to actually accomplish what it is. Let's say you want to build a 30-foot high golden horse, and then your event is 2 months away. Yeah, that might be something you have to pull from scope. So here's one of my favorite tools in SCA projects that I don't hear the term a lot from other people. It's called the work breakdown structure. This is not the in the weeds project plan that typically project managers handle. This is what can I put in the hands of my team members so that they know what's expected of them. So it's a little bit more in the weeds than a milestone document. It's not a major accomplishment, but it's not too in the weeds that you overwhelm your team. Does anyone have questions on this? It basically just has what it is and what your goal date is.
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm following all the material. You're doing an excellent job. And it really is challenging for me to think this way, which is what I need. So thank you. Is there any software that organizes like this or forces you to organize like this that also isn't going to set me back $100?
Yeah, there is. Have you heard of Microsoft OneNote?
Yes, I do have a copy of that.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
With OneNote showing?
Oh, no. It looks like you're sharing a window, not a screen.
All right, let me new share. So OneNote is free to use.
Okay.
And you can share OneNote with other groups. So I'm just giving you a little example here.
Gotcha.
I need to move my window so I can get to my tabs. But this is really, really easy to pull together. You just simply add a page and create different notes. You can also
do you use
have all the tools.
I take it?
I do. This is my world on OneNote. And basically I have every group section organized with the work breakdown structure, right? And I keep track in here, and I can quickly, anytime anyone wants something, all I have to do is click email page and send it to them if they want to know where they're at, or I'll print it off and bring it to the project meeting that we're having. And each section has their work breakdown structure list, a supplies budget list, a shift schedule, open question needs. This is where I track it. We had just started this project and Corona happened. And of course our risk and issues.
That actually helps a lot because it's, yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you. Thank you for showing me that.
You're welcome. There are project management tools out there like Monday.com. I don't know if you've heard of that. They have a month free if you want to try it out. I find that most everyone can use this one.
What about Open Project?
I haven't tried that yet. Harold, have you tried it?
No, but I'm seeing it.
There's an open everything at this point. You have my attention.
So they have a community version free forever. Plus there's a cloud version and an enterprise version. But this is one of those where I think they're just selling commercial support for customers that need to have commercial support.
Wow, that's fun. I'm gonna have to go check that out.
Now it may be more for agile software development, or it may just be a general project management tool. I don't know. But I'm seeing a lot of stuff about Open Project. I posted the link into the chat.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'm also seeing a Project Libre. So the LibreOffice folks seem to have a project tool. So that was the first thing I checked. Was I popped up in my Open Office and check to see if there was if they had added project stuff to it, because you've got, spreadsheets, Word presentations, all kinds of other crap in there already, and figured it might be a place where they had tossed in project stuff, but apparently not. So this is over on SourceForge.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you. I am definitely tool driven. I mean, if I'm measuring something, having a ruler in inches helps me stay in inches versus other scales. That's the way I see tools. So that is a great help. But we digress. I apologize. Thank you.
No. It's a good question. Thank you. So next we'll talk about, how the work breakdown structure differs from the project plan. So let's take this, identify a solution for public showers, right? And your project plan would actually then break down the in-the-weeds details that a project manager may need to know that your actual team member, they know, but they don't need to be overwhelmed by a long plan. It kind of helps you guide what they're doing. You're keeping things like start date, end date, percent complete, any sort of notes about the progress. This is kind of your job where you're taking some of that heavy lift of managing, remembering, tracking everything that they're doing. Sometimes you have to put placeholders in your own plan too, if you're trying to get a new vendor or purchase something new, sometimes there's going to be steps afterwards that you don't know at the time that a project plan is created, so it's ever evolving. And this is just simply, I use Microsoft Project for this, but, as Harold mentioned, there's lots of tools out there that are free. Excel works also. Heck, even Word is something that you can use if you really need to. Your milestone schedule is basically really super high level. It is kind of the milestone moments that are critically important. These are the things that the seneschal wants to know about, or maybe that you present in your populace meetings. They don't need to be in the weeds on every little detail of what everyone is doing. They just want to know, do you have this X thing? If they're interested in knowing about it, consider that a milestone. And how will you come up with your timeline? So the best way, if you know when your event is, which is often seems to be the case, before you know even who your team is, you start at the deadline and work your way back. This will help you gauge and understand when you need to start. And it's good to do as soon as you become a leader of an event. It's good to do that exercise right away and kind of do a shirt size estimate of working back to kick off, to understand when it is that you need to get the team together, because it may surprise you that it will take longer than you realize. While some of the deliverables may seem pretty minor in scope, remember you're only meeting maybe once or twice a month. So you have to be sure that you give that extra time in there to make sure you're not scrambling at the last minute.
Can I throw a footnote on that?
Yeah.
Finishing something too early, I have found, is almost as detrimental as not managing your time. Because if you finish a segment of the overall project too early, everyone else is left with the false assumption of, oh, we have plenty of time. And it can be the day before the event or the activity, and everyone's like, oh, we have plenty of time. No, you don't. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt and the black eye.
Yep. Pace yourself. Fighting scope creep. You guys may have heard this term before, but this is again where all of a sudden all these different things come out of the way. Somebody wants something else. Somebody thinks of something else. A deadline ends up getting missed, and that creates actually new needs for things that you hadn't even planned on. So one of your biggest responsibilities as a project manager is to fight that scope creep from happening. And the best way to do this, so that you can remain in budget, on time, and reduce the frustration impact that it has on your team, is by creating a change control process. So if somebody wants to add something new in, let's say decorations, decided they want to build a water fountain for the middle of the fighting field or whatever, I don't know. But they're not taking care of something else that they really need to be committed to. If you have a change control process in place up front, so it doesn't feel like you're picking on anyone in particular, you're letting the whole team know up front, if you want to change, this is who you need to reach out to with your proposal for the change. This is after everyone's signed off on the scope, they understand, you've walked through the project, guys, this is what we're doing. If they want to change at that point, go ahead and have them go through a process. It can be informal or as formal as you want. Here's my change, is this okay? And as the PM, you're going to have to make the tough choices as to whether or not it's for the good of the project that they're allowed to do that. Any comments or questions? Now, obviously, again, we're working with volunteers, so some people will do whatever they want regardless, and we adjust and work with that. But do try to engage people in buying into the change management process if you can. So RACI. RACI is also something that's not commonly used, but it's one of my fun favorite tools. It stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed. Responsible party is, those who are marked as an R are responsible for a task or part of a task. And there can be more than one R for each deliverable. Accountable, there should always only be one person who is ultimately accountable for a deliverable. And consulted and informed are those people that you either need or can check with for guidance and consult, or that you need to notify if there's a status or change on something. Your seneschal may be an example of someone who needs to be informed on all levels. So here's kind of it.
Like involved versus committed?
I'm sorry, where?
Is that anything like involved versus committed? So as an example, in the project of making breakfast, the chicken is involved, the pig is committed.
This deals more with
You missed the joke.
I don't, yeah, sorry.
Bacon and egg breakfast, the chicken is involved, the pig is committed.
Okay.
That's dark. I'm just saying, that's dark.
It really is. Thanks, Harold. Here's your RACI example that I put together. So I have the different areas typically of an event, and we have all the happy people listed up top. And you can be multiple things. You can be both a consultant for gate and need to be informed about how gate's doing, setting up, or whatnot. There's also a whole lot of things wrong with this RACI right now that it helps you identify as a PM, where do I need to do some focus on, and we'll kind of walk through that. We need to move our pictures again. So here's an example. If you have too many R's underneath one person, that could be a quick way to identify that somebody is perhaps at risk of being overwhelmed in a project. They could be the first people that burn out, and they could be also the first people that really negatively impact your project if they drop out because they're burnt out. Here's an example of where we have too few R's. So poor Bob, he's in charge of site, and he's the only one signed up for it. So this can point out to you really quick that Bob needs help. Limited A's or R's might highlight someone who may be able to offer help. So perhaps Jack, who is not really engaged in these other areas, maybe you can reach out to him to help Bob. too many A's for one task can indicate that there's a risk of confusion for who is accountable for what. So example, you very well may have 3 different shift leads for gate: morning, afternoon, and evening, right? But when you have them all grouped onto one line, it is hard for people to look at this and know who to go to and when, or who's part of the morning team, who's part of the actual afternoon team. If ever you find a case where you have multiple A's, accountables, go ahead and split them out into their own row and identify their team. So call it gate morning, gate afternoon, gate evening. Here's an example of no A's. So we've got Bob, John, and Jane all volunteering to help with advertising, but nobody wants to lead it. And there's some people that need to know about it, and they may talk to a few of them, but all of these people are kind of operating autonomously, and there's no one for the project manager to go to for a status on that particular area. They're going to have to always reach out to 3 different people to find out what's going on. So this could be a place, I'm not saying that you have to, but finding an accountable person for all of advertising could help save your sanity as a PM and help make that team be more effective. Communication plan, I think, is extremely unappreciated at the start of a project. To sit down with your team and agree together, formally, written down, when you're meeting, who you're meeting, and that you take their feedback into consideration. It's an extremely powerful tool. When I create communication plans for projects, people refer to it often. Surprisingly enough, it kind of makes me happy about that. Well, what does the communication plan say? Where does this stuff? Who needs to be doing what? You might get those folks who are just kind of feeling out a project, and they want to find out, how much am I going to have to be engaged? This is a place where you can work with them on what would work with their schedule. You can outline all the different places where you're going to have information. Perhaps you have a Google Docs file or whatever. Include that in your communication plan. And then also, this is a great place to mention where your approvers are for each area: scope, schedule, budget. If something's being changed, here's who you go to. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as this. A risk management plan is also really important to have. I know we have emergency plans, a lot of typical forms that are out there, but your project can also have risks as well, not just the event itself. So take some time. Write down when you see a potential issue with something. Talk with folks about what do we do. Sometimes you have to avoid it entirely. Sometimes you need to accept it. No fire allowed on the site. There's not much you can do there. So what do we have to do about that? And sometimes you can mitigate. There's that rain example we had talked about. You can determine up front what's going to happen if something goes wrong. And this is another example of something you can do with your team in planning through. So phew, we got through the planning phase. I promise the rest of this is going to get faster. It's pretty simple. The execution phase is about getting the work done. You've done all that planning. You've outlined the scope, who's doing what, risk mitigation, change management, all of that, the schedule. It's now time to get the work done. And your tools as a project manager is strictly going to be that project plan that we talked about, some meeting agenda and notes, which I don't think I need to demonstrate here. It's pretty simple. And then the team and stakeholder communication. So continue to talk to people, keep them motivated, reach out with rewards, attaboys. I love this quote here: rewards and motivation are an oil change for project engines. Do it regularly and do it often. So, very quickly, a guide to understanding team emotions. So let's say we have some problems on the team. Sometimes when you hear in emotions and in messages that there is an issue, this little table can guide you to what might be missing for the cause of that emotion to happen, or even action. If you have awareness, buy-in, skills, desire, resources, and an action plan, you typically have a happy team member. If you're missing awareness, they don't know what's going on, you're going to hear voices of confusion. If somebody didn't buy in to your scope that you worked so hard to create, what you could end up seeing is sabotage. Not vindictively, but they don't have a skilled interest in it. And sometimes vindictively, I guess, too. But typically, people aren't married to your project if they didn't have a hand in helping build it. If they're missing the skills, they really want to build that 30-foot tall horse, that they just don't know how to do it, but they've promised that they're going to do it, you might see some really bad anxiety happening. A lack of desire can sometimes mean resistance. Do we really have to do that? A lack of resources can cause frustration, and a lack of action plan could just have a bunch of people running around kind of doing things, but really not getting anywhere. So if you ever start to see any of these, come back to this list and go, okay, what might be missing? And that's going to drive your actions. Any questions?
I actually have one. And I'm drawing off my SCA experience, but you mentioned that lack of awareness can cause confusion. Okay, that's fair. But you also mentioned that lack of skills can generate anxiety, and lack of, well, I wanted to concentrate on skills for a second, can cause anxiety. My experience has been that lack of awareness causes anxiety as well. How do you differentiate between confusion or lack of awareness and lack of skills based on that surface symptom of anxiety? Or am I making sense, or am I babbling?
Yeah, no. This isn't like a one-size-fits-all sorts of thing, right? Some people may definitely express anxiety if they aren't aware of what's going on. And I've definitely heard, I don't know what's going on. But that comes across typically as confusion.
So if you're not sure, ask more questions.
Yeah.
Okay. And I wasn't trying to force it as a one-size-fits-all. I was just, and the chart is accurate largely. This is eye-opening for me. I was just kind of curious. I don't think confusion is the most common thing I see when there's lack of awareness, but the SCA is a bunch of oddballs anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
May also be a combination of lack of awareness and lack of skills.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The next phase, monitor and control. So this is where you as the PM are just monitoring the project plan and your budget against what your schedule goals are and what your budget goals are. So people are working, and hopefully you have not also over volunteered to do those tasks because your efforts are needed, and watching and monitoring over all of the work that everyone else is doing, and make sure you stay on track and to be available to help whenever needed. So those same tools are needed here: project plan, budget, and meeting notes. Be transparent with your team that you are monitoring each step of the project. That project plan isn't just about making it easy for you, it's also to demonstrate to them, hey, I've got to be accountable for this stuff. Somebody's watching. When you don't have things documented and written down, people tend to float. And it really makes it very hard to keep them accountable. Also, keep them aware of the dollars spent. Go ahead and share that news as they go along. I know a lot of folks say, go ahead and save up your receipts and turn them all in the end. Well, you can do that, definitely. But in your meetings, have people just kind of talk out loud about the dollars. And just that awareness tends to help people be more frugal. Questions? Lastly, the closure phase. So any sort of liabilities and resource needs need to be resolved there at the end. The project's final budget is confirmed and reported, and a lessons learned exercise is held. Sometimes people refer to it like AARs, after action review sessions. There's lots of names that have been used. And then, of course, a formal closure with the project team. And let's talk about that lessons learned template really quick. So we really want to make sure that we don't just drop everything and walk away from a project and just forget all of the heartache or troubles that we might have gone through and overcome, because we don't want to miss learning from those and avoid repeating them in the future. And we want to work on improving our processes before the next event so that we don't have to repeat those. So we capture both the successes to focus on the positive and the opportunities for improvement. We don't call them failures. We don't call them the bad things. And this is not at all in any way, shape, or form meant to make anyone feel bad. You have to do a really good job at putting out there that this is just so that we can improve. And this is how we make our next event better. So it can be as simple as one sentence. Ask everyone to submit things anonymously. Don't share who turned things into you. Compile them all together and then meet with them as a team. Meet on them as a team. Any questions?
We've done that type of thing down in Bjornsburg after every event since the entire time that I've been down here. And my guess is even before that, me having a post-event meeting to talk about what worked, what didn't work. Because much like the way many Japanese manufacturers work, there's always room for improvement. You know, nobody is ever 100% perfect. There is, you know, you can always get a little bit better.
Exactly.
Sometimes we didn't have very many things that we could really improve upon. But mostly every single after event report, the thing we could improve upon the most was communication.
Yep.
The one thing I will throw out there is, while anonymity is a nice idea, in the SCA it's going to be almost impossible. Most of us know, I mean, if someone makes a comment about finances in our group, I know who the exchequers are. I mean, it's just a process of elimination. I know who the exchequers are, and we usually only have one. If someone makes a comment about golf carts, I can tell you right off the top of my head, there are two people that are going to mention that topic.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's about driving them, that limits it down. And I'm not picking on anyone. I'm just saying, keep in mind, best of intentions are fine, but be aware of your group.
Right.
They're not idiots. You didn't bring idiots on board.
Yeah. Sometimes as a project manager, I have to tweak things wording wise to avoid situations like that, or try to make it a little bit more higher level or a little easier on how it's put out there. I always get approval, of course, from the person who authored it, but yeah, as it's an exercise for me when I have to pull those feedbacks together. But people always walk away from them feeling good. They understand that no one's being singled out. Typically, you have comments coming from all areas, and so it kind of eases the sting of that. And maybe you can make it something that you laugh about. And again, really focus on those project successes. Have the team cheer. You know, find a silly reward and draw up, you know, a page of award notice and a ribbon or something silly, and celebrate those successes, of course, most of all. And then, you know, to coin a very cliche phrase, but it truly is, you are going to have so much go wrong in a project, little things you never thought you could plan for, and it's okay. It really is okay. You will get through it, and just keep using those tools to adjust the plan, communicate well, trust in your team, trust in yourself, and you'll see it through. Well, that's my bit. You can reach me on Gmail, of course, at any time, and Facebook. I welcome all new SCA friends, so feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is arguably one of the more important classes I've taken this year.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, thank you for teaching this, because there are not enough people who know this, and even people who've done part of this, there's always more you can learn about it. So it's always really helpful.
Yeah. Thank
Well,
you.
Will this deck be available? Will you be able to send these slides out?
Yeah, I was going to talk with the group owner about where to post these if she just wants them posted as comments. Is that typically what she does to events?
I don't think we've shared a deck before.
Mm.
I have no idea how
file
Kat's going to do it.
in that group. Just
Yeah.
post it as a file in the group.
Okay.
Yeah, you can share it as a file in the group.
Okay. We'll see if I have permission. I don't know.
Everybody who's a member of the group should be able to load